My name is Detective Mike Rodriguez, and I've been working the streets of Chicago for over 15 years. In my time on the force, I've seen just about everything: domestic disputes, gang violence, armed robberies, you name it. But there's one call that still haunts me to this day, and it happened on a cold Tuesday night in November. The temperature had dropped to 28 degrees, and a light snow was beginning to fall across the city. Most people were home, warm in their beds, completely unaware that just a few miles away, someone was fighting for their life. I was working the night shift when our dispatcher, Sarah Thompson, came over the radio with an unusual tone in her voice. Sarah had been working 911 calls for over 12 years, and I had never heard her sound quite like this. All units, we have a possible domestic situation at 1247 Maple Street. Caller whispered one word and the line went dead. What many people don't know is that Sarah's own sister had been trapped in an abusive relationship years earlier. Her sister never made it out alive. That personal tragedy had made Sarah incredibly sensitive to the subtle signs of domestic violence, and something in that whispered word had triggered every alarm bell in her experienced mind. The address was in a quiet suburban neighborhood called Willowbrook, the kind of place where the biggest crime was usually someone forgetting to bring in their trash, cans, or teenagers toilet papering houses on Halloween. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained sidewalks, and houses that cost anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000. It was the American dream neighborhood, where violence was supposed to be something that happened to other people. In other places, Officer Jenny Martinez and I were the closest unit, about 3 minutes out. Jenny was relatively new to the force, only 18 months on the job, but she had already proven herself to be sharp, intuitive, and fearless. As we drove through the empty streets, our patrol car's headlights cutting through the falling snow, something felt different about this call. In my experience, when someone calls 911 and can only manage to whisper one word, they're in immediate danger. The fact that the line went dead made it even more concerning. Our 911 system is sophisticated. Every call is recorded, every call is traced, and every call is analyzed by voice stress technology. That night, our system showed the call came from 1247 Maple Street, lasted exactly 4 seconds, and the voice stress analysis indicated extreme distress levels that were off the charts. "What do you think, Mike?" Jenny asked as we turned onto Maple Street. She was gripping the steering wheel tightly, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. Could be a prank call, but something tells me it's not. I had the same feeling. The houses on Maple Street were typical middle-class homes with well-maintained lawns and 2-car garages. Each house probably had a mortgage, a dog, maybe some kids, and parents who worked 95 jobs and worried about things like college tuition and retirement savings. Number 1247 was a 2-story colonial with blue shutters and white trim. From the outside, everything looked normal. The porch light was on, casting a warm yellow glow over the front steps. There was a single light glowing in what appeared to be a second-floor bedroom window. A late-model Honda Civic sat in the driveway next to a Ford pickup truck. Everything screamed suburban normalcy. We parked across the street and observed the house for a moment. Standard protocol for domestic calls is to assess the situation before making contact. You never know what you're walking into, and officer safety is always the top priority. Domestic violence calls are among the most dangerous situations police officers face because emotions are running high. People are often intoxicated or under the influence of drugs, and weapons are frequently involved. Dispatch, Unit 47 is on. Seen at 1247 Maple Street, I radioed. House appears quiet from the exterior. We're going to make contact. As we approached the front door, I noticed the lawn was perfectly manicured, and there were Halloween decorations still up from the previous month, a few pumpkins on the porch, and some fake spider webs draped over the bushes. A small American flag hung from a pole next to the front door. It looked like any other suburban home where a normal family lived their normal lives, paid their taxes, and contributed to their community. But appearances can be deceiving, and in police work, you learn quickly that the most dangerous situations often hide behind the most ordinary facades. The most violent crimes often happen in the most peaceful-looking places, committed by people who seem like model citizens to everyone around them. Jenny and I positioned ourselves on either side of the front door, a tactical formation we had practiced hundreds of times. I knocked firmly, but not aggressively. We didn't want to escalate whatever situation might be happening inside. Chicago Police Department, I announced in a clear, authoritative voice. We received a call from this address. The response was immediate silence. Not the kind of silence you get when no one's home, but the heavy, tense silence that tells you people are inside and they're listening. It's the kind of silence that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up because you know something is wrong. I knocked again, this time a little louder. Police. We need to speak with someone. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 30 seconds, we heard footsteps approaching the door. They were slow, hesitant footsteps, not the quick pace of someone eager to answer the door. The porch light illuminated the peephole, and I could sense someone looking out at us. I made sure my badge was visible and kept my hands where they could be seen. Then, slowly, the door opened just a crack, held in place by a security chain. A man's face appeared in the gap. He was probably in his mid-40s, with graying hair and tired eyes that had dark circles under them. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. He was wearing a white t-shirt and jeans, and I noticed his hands were dirty, like he had been working with soil or concrete. He looked nervous, which wasn't unusual. Most people get anxious when police show up at their door, even when they haven't done anything wrong. But there was something else in his expression, something that my 15 years of experience told me was more than just normal nervousness. "Officers, is there a problem?" he asked. His voice was steady, but I noticed his hand gripping the doorframe was trembling slightly. There was also a slight slur to his words that suggested he had been drinking. "Sir, we received a 911 call from this address about 20 minutes ago. Someone called and then the line went dead. We need to make sure everyone's okay." The man's expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear, guilt. It was hard to tell, but it was definitely something. He glanced back over his shoulder quickly, as if checking to make sure no one was behind him. "I'm sorry, officers, but no one here called 911. Must have been a mistake, or maybe a wrong number. You know how these things happen sometimes. This is where experience comes in handy. In 15 years of police work, you develop an ability to read people, to sense when something isn't right. This man was lying, and not very well. His body language screamed that he was hiding something. The way he was blocking the door, the nervous glances over his shoulder, the trembling hands, all of it pointed to deception. "Sir, I'm going to need you to open the door so we can verify that everyone in the house is safe," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. It's standard procedure for welfare checks. The man hesitated, and in that hesitation I heard something that made my blood run cold, a faint sound from somewhere inside the house. It was barely audible, but it sounded like someone crying. Jenny heard it too, and I saw her hand move instinctively toward her radio. "Sir, I'm going to need you to step outside and speak with us," I said, my hand instinctively moving closer to my service weapon. Not because I was planning to draw it, but because my training and experience were telling me that this situation was about to get complicated. The man at the door looked back over his shoulder nervously, and this time I caught a glimpse of the interior of the house. The living room was dimly lit, but I could see furniture that looked like it had been moved around recently. There were also what appeared to be scratches on the hardwood floor, as if heavy objects had been dragged across it. "Officers, I really don't understand what this is about. No one here called the police. Maybe you have the wrong address. There are a lot of houses on this street that look similar." That's when Jenny stepped forward. She had been listening carefully, and her younger ears had picked up something mine had missed. "Sir, is there someone else in the house with you? We can hear crying." The man's face went pale, and for a moment, his carefully constructed facade cracked. "That's a television. My wife is watching a movie upstairs. She likes those sad romantic films. You know how women are." But as he said it, we heard it again. Definitely not a television. It was the sound of someone in distress, and it was coming from the second floor of the house. The sound was muffled, as if it was coming through a closed door or even multiple walls. "Sir, I need you to open this door right now," I said, my voice taking on the authoritative tone that every police officer learns to use when a situation is escalating. "We have reason to believe someone in this house may be in danger." The man started to close the door, but I put my foot against it. The security chain was the only thing preventing us from entering, and I could feel him pushing against the door from the other side. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. We're not going away until we know everyone in this house is safe." That's when we heard it, a voice from upstairs, faint but unmistakable. "Help." It was a woman's voice, and she was trying to be quiet, but the desperation in that single word was heartbreaking. It was the same word that had been whispered into the 911 call 20 minutes earlier. Jenny and I exchanged a look. We both knew we had probable cause to enter the house now. Someone inside was clearly in distress and asking for help. Under the law, we had what's called exigent circumstances, an emergency situation that allows police to enter a home without a warrant. "Sir, step away from the door," I commanded. "We're coming in." The man's demeanor changed completely. The nervous, apologetic facade dropped away, and for a moment, I saw something dangerous in his eyes. It was the look of a cornered animal, someone who knew they were caught and was calculating their options. "You can't come in here without a warrant. I know my rights." "Actually, we can," Jenny said, pulling out her radio to call for backup. "Exigent circumstances. We have someone inside calling for help." I pushed the door open, breaking the security chain with a sharp crack. The man stumbled backward, and I could see the panic in his face. He knew his game was up, and now he was trying to figure out how to minimize the damage. The house was dimly lit, with only a few lamps providing illumination. The living room looked normal enough, a couch, coffee table, television playing quietly, but there was something in the air, a tension that you could almost taste. There was also a smell not quite right, like cleaning chemicals mixed with something else I couldn't identify. "Ma'am, this is the Chicago Police Department," I called out loudly. "Can you hear me?" The response came immediately. "Help me. Please." The voice was coming from upstairs, and it was filled with terror. But there was also hope in it now. The hope that comes when you realize that rescue might actually be possible. Asterisk. The man who had answered the door was now standing in his living room, his hands shaking visibly. I could see sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool temperature in the house. "Officers, you don't understand. My wife, ... she's been having some mental health issues lately. She gets confused sometimes. She's been seeing things, hearing voices. I've been trying to get her help, but she won't go to the doctor." I've heard this excuse before. Abusers often try to discredit their victims by claiming they're mentally unstable. It's a classic manipulation tactic designed to make law enforcement question the victim's credibility. It made me even more concerned about what we might find upstairs. "Sir, what's your name?" Jenny asked, pulling out her notepad. "David Mitchell. This is my house. I've lived here for 8 years with my wife Sarah. We're good people, officers. We pay our taxes. We don't cause trouble. This is all just a big misunderstanding. Sir, I need you to sit down on that couch and keep your hands where I can see them," Jenny instructed while I headed toward the staircase. "Don't move from that spot." The stairs creaked under my weight as I climbed toward the second floor. Each step felt heavy with anticipation. In situations like this, you never know what you're going to find. Best case scenario, it really was a misunderstanding and someone was watching a sad movie. Worst case, well, I tried not to think about that. The hallway upstairs was dark except for light coming from under one door at the end. There were family photos on the walls. David and a woman who I assumed was Sarah at various stages of their relationship. Wedding photos, vacation pictures, holiday celebrations. They looked happy in the early photos, but I noticed that in the more recent ones, Sarah's smile seemed forced, and there were fewer pictures of her overall. "Ma'am, I'm Officer Rodriguez with the Chicago Police. I'm coming upstairs. Are you hurt? Please hurry," came the whispered response. The voice was coming from the room at the end of the hallway, the one with lights seeping out from underneath the door. As I got closer, I could hear what sounded like scratching or scraping coming from inside the room. I approached the door carefully, my hand on my weapon but not drawn. I could hear David downstairs talking to Jenny, his voice getting more agitated. "Ma'am, I'm right outside your door. Are you alone in there?" "Yes," she whispered. "He locked me in. I can't get out. The window is nailed shut." I tried the door handle. It was locked, but it was just a standard bedroom door lock, not a deadbolt. However, as I examined it more closely, I could see that additional hardware had been installed, a slide bolt that could only be operated from the outside. This wasn't a standard bedroom door anymore. It had been modified to keep someone inside. "Ma'am, I'm going to open the door, okay? Step away from it." I put my shoulder against the door and pushed. The lock gave way easily, but the slide bolt held firm. I had to put more force into it, and finally, the door frame splintered and the door swung open. What I saw inside that room will stay with me for the rest of my life. The woman was sitting on the floor in the corner of the bedroom, as far from the door as she could get. She was probably in her early 40s, with shoulder-length brown hair that was disheveled and matted. Her clothes were torn and dirty, and I could see bruises on her arms and face in various stages of healing. Some fresh and purple, others yellow and green, indicating this had been going on for some time. But what struck me most was the look in her eyes, pure terror mixed with relief that help had finally arrived. The room itself told a story of imprisonment. The window had been nailed shut from the outside with heavy boards. There were scratches on the doorframe where she had obviously tried to claw her way out. A bucket sat in one corner, and the smell told me what it had been used for. There was a mattress on the floor with no sheets, just a thin blanket. A plastic water bottle sat nearby, nearly empty. "Ma'am, you're safe now," I said, holstering my weapon and kneeling down to her level. "I'm Officer Rodriguez. What's your name?" "Sarah," she whispered, her voice hoarse from dehydration and fear. "Sarah Mitchell, that's my husband downstairs. He's been holding me here for 3 days. 3 days. The thought made my stomach turn. This woman had been trapped in this room for 3 days while her neighbors went about their normal lives just yards away, completely unaware of the horror happening next door. Children had probably walked to school past this house. Mail had been delivered. Life had continued normally while Sarah Mitchell was being held prisoner in her own home. "Sarah, are you hurt? Do you need medical attention?" She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "He hit me yesterday when I tried to leave. He said if I ever tried to call for help again, he'd kill me. He showed me a gun and said he'd use it on me and then on himself." I spoke into my radio. "Dispatch, I need an ambulance at 1247 Maple Street immediately. We have a victim of domestic violence who needs medical attention. Also requesting Detective Chen from Domestic Violence Unit." "Copy that, Unit 47. Ambulance is en route. ETA 5 minutes. Detective Chen is being notified." I looked around the room more carefully and noticed that the window had been nailed shut from the outside with heavy boards and long nails. There were scratches on the door frame where Sarah had obviously tried to claw her way out. This wasn't a domestic dispute that had gotten out of hand. This was imprisonment, and it had been planned and executed with deliberate cruelty. "Sarah, how were you able to call 911? Did you have a phone?" She reached under the mattress and pulled out an old flip phone. It was a basic model from several years ago, the kind that people used before smartphones became universal. "I found this in a box of my husband's old things when he brought me some food yesterday. It still had some battery left. I was so scared. He would hear me, so I just whispered the first word I could think of." "What word did you say?" "Help," she whispered. I just said help, and then I heard him coming up the stairs, so I hung up and hid the phone. That old flip phone had been David's phone from 2018. He had thrown it in a box and forgotten about it when he upgraded to a smartphone. The phone had been sitting there for 3 years, with just enough battery to make one call. Sarah later told me she had been praying for a miracle, and that forgotten phone was exactly that, a miracle hiding in plain sight. That one word, help, had been enough for our dispatcher to send units to investigate. It had quite literally saved Sarah's life. Asterisk, I helped Sarah to her feet and guided her toward the door. She was weak from 3 days with minimal food and water, and she leaned heavily on me for support. "We're going to get you out of here, and we're going to make sure you're safe. But first, I need to know, does your husband have any weapons in the house?" Sarah's eyes widened with fear. "He has a gun. He keeps it in the nightstand drawer. He showed it to me yesterday and said he'd use it if I tried to escape again. He also has a baseball bat that he's been carrying around, and ... She paused, her voice breaking, "and he's been digging something in the basement. He wouldn't tell me what it was, but I heard him down there every night, digging and digging." This changed everything. I immediately got on my radio, Unit 47 to all units. Suspect may be armed with a handgun and possibly other weapons. Requesting immediate backup. Also requesting crime scene unit for possible evidence in basement. Copy. Unit 47. Units 23 and 31 are en route. ETA 2 minutes. Crime scene unit has been notified. I needed to get Sarah out of the house and away from her husband as quickly as possible, but I also needed to make sure Jenny was safe downstairs. For all I knew, David Mitchell had already overpowered her and was waiting for me with his weapon. Sarah, I need you to stay right behind me as we go downstairs. Don't say anything, just follow my lead. If I tell you to run, you run straight out the front door and don't look back. We made our way down the hallway and to the top of the stairs. I could hear voices from the living room. Jenny was still talking to David, which was a good sign. But I could also hear that his voice was getting more agitated, more desperate. Jenny, I called down. I'm coming down with Mrs. Mitchell. How's everything down there? All good up here, Mike. Mr. Mitchell is being very cooperative. But as we reached the bottom of the stairs, I could see that David Mitchell's demeanor had changed dramatically. He was no longer the nervous, apologetic man who had answered the door. His face was red with anger, his fists were clenched, and there was a wild look in his eyes that told me he was calculating his options. You have no right to be in my house, he snarled, his voice rising. That's my wife, and this is between us. This is a private family matter. Actually, Mr. Mitchell, this is now a police matter, I said, positioning myself between him and Sarah. Your wife has alleged that you've been holding her against her will and that you've assaulted her. I can see evidence of injuries on her person, and the room upstairs has been modified to prevent her from leaving. David's eyes darted between Jenny and me, and I could see him calculating his options. This was the most dangerous moment when a suspect realizes they're caught and starts thinking about fight or flight. His hands were shaking, and I could see sweat dripping down his face. Sir, I need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back, Jenny said, pulling out her handcuffs. You're under arrest. That's when David made his move. David Mitchell lunged toward the staircase, clearly trying to get to the gun he had upstairs. But Jenny was ready for him. She had been watching his body language and saw the attack coming. She tackled him before he could reach the first step, and they both went down hard on the living room floor, crashing into the coffee table and sending a lamp flying. Gun upstairs. I shouted, pushing Sarah toward the front door. Get outside and stay there. Jenny and David were wrestling on the floor. He was bigger than her, probably outweighing her by 60 pounds, but she had training and adrenaline on her side. I moved to help her, but David managed to break free and started scrambling up the stairs on his hands and knees, desperate to reach his weapon. I couldn't let him reach that gun. I grabbed his ankle and pulled him back down, and he tumbled to the bottom of the stairs with a loud crash that shook the entire house. He was dazed but not unconscious, and he immediately started fighting again with the desperation of a cornered animal. David Mitchell, you're under arrest, I said, trying to get control of his arms while he thrashed beneath me. Stop resisting. But he wasn't listening to reason. He was like a wild animal, fighting with the desperation of a man who knew his life was over. He managed to land a punch on my jaw that made my ears ring and sent stars across my vision, but Jenny was there, with her taser. Stop fighting, or you're going to get tased, she warned, the red laser dot dancing across his chest. David didn't stop. If anything, he fought harder, trying to break free and make another run for the stairs. He was screaming now, a mixture of rage and panic, that was almost inhuman. Jenny had no choice. She deployed her taser, and David's body went rigid as 50,000 volts of electricity coursed through him. His muscles locked up, and he fell back to the floor, temporarily incapacitated. That gave us the opening we needed. I rolled him onto his stomach and got his hands behind his back while Jenny applied the handcuffs. The whole struggle had lasted maybe 90 seconds, but it felt like an eternity. My heart was pounding, my jaw was throbbing, and I could taste blood in my mouth. David Mitchell, you're under arrest for domestic violence, false imprisonment, assault on a police officer, and kidnapping, I said, breathing heavily. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. As I read him his Miranda rights, I could hear sirens approaching. Our backup was arriving, along with the ambulance for Sarah. The quiet suburban street was about to become a crime scene, and the neighbors were going to discover that the American dream house next door had been hiding a nightmare. Within minutes, our quiet suburban street was filled with police cars and emergency vehicles. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the snow that was still falling, creating an almost surreal scene in the peaceful neighborhood. Detective Lisa Chen from our domestic violence unit arrived to take over the investigation, and paramedics were treating Sarah in the back of an ambulance. Neighbors had begun to emerge from their houses, drawn by the commotion. They stood in small groups, on their porches and lawns, whispering among themselves and trying to understand what had happened in their safe, quiet neighborhood. I walked over to check on Sarah while Jenny processed David and got him into the back of a patrol car. Sarah was sitting on the ambulance gurney, looking small and fragile under the emergency blanket the paramedics had given her. Anne 4 was running into her arm to combat dehydration, and a paramedic was documenting her injuries with photographs. How are you feeling, Sarah? I asked. Better, she said, managing a weak smile. For the first time in 3 days, I feel like I can breathe. I thought I was going to die in that room. I really thought he was going to kill me. Detective Chen joined us with her notepad and digital recorder. Lisa Chen was a veteran detective who specialized in domestic violence cases. She had a gentle but thorough approach that helped victims feel safe enough to tell their stories. Sarah, I know this is difficult, but I need to ask you some questions about what happened. Can you tell me how this all started? Sarah took a deep breath and wrapped the blanket tighter around herself. David and I have been married for 12 years. He's always had a temper, but it's gotten worse over the past year. He lost his job 6 months ago when his company downsized, and he started drinking more. The violence started about 3 months ago. What happened 3 days ago that led to him locking you in the bedroom? I told him I was leaving. I had packed a bag and was going to stay with my sister until I could figure out what to do. I had been planning it for weeks, saving money, gathering important documents. When he found the bag hidden in the closet, he went into a rage. He hit me harder than he ever had before and dragged me upstairs. He said if I ever tried to leave him again, he'd kill me and then kill himself. Detective Chen nodded, taking notes. Had he ever threatened to kill you before? Yes, many times over the past few months. But this time was different. He meant it. I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just angry, he was calculating, planning. He told me he'd rather see me dead than with someone else. The paramedic interrupted our conversation. We need to get her to the hospital for a full examination and to document her injuries properly. She's dehydrated and has some injuries that need medical attention. Of course, Detective Chen said. Sarah, We're going to take good care of you, and David isn't going to hurt you anymore. I promise you that." As the ambulance pulled away, I couldn't help but think about how close we had come to a tragedy. If Sarah hadn't found that old phone, if she hadn't been brave enough to call for help, if our dispatcher hadn't taken that whispered word seriously, the outcome could have been very different. After the arrest, we interviewed the neighbors to see if anyone had noticed anything unusual. Mrs. Johnson, who lived next door, told us she had heard what sounded like furniture being moved around. Late at night for the past few days, she thought they were redecorating. Mr. Peterson, across the street, mentioned seeing David's car in the driveway constantly, which was unusual since he normally went to work every day. These small details that seemed innocent were actually signs of imprisonment happening, right under everyone's noses. Asterisk, while Sarah was being treated at the hospital, Detective Chen and I conducted a thorough search of the Mitchell house with the crime scene unit. What we found painted a disturbing picture of escalating domestic violence and control that had been building for months. In the bedroom where Sarah had been held, we found evidence of the imprisonment, the nails in the window frame, scratches on the door where she had tried to escape, and a bucket in the corner that David had apparently given her to use as a bathroom. It was degrading and inhumane. There were also scratch marks on the walls where Sarah had tried to claw her way out, and we found blood under her fingernails from her desperate attempts to escape. In David's nightstand, we found the gun Sarah had mentioned, a .38 caliber revolver, fully loaded with hollow point bullets. We also found a notebook where David had been writing what could only be described as a manifesto about his marriage and his plans for Sarah. The entries were disturbing and detailed, showing a man who had been planning this imprisonment for weeks. "Listen to this," Detective Chen said, reading from the notebook. "She thinks she can leave me, but she's wrong. She belongs to me, and if I can't have her, no one can. I'll make sure of that. I've been thinking about this for weeks now, and I know what I have to do." The entries went back several weeks and detailed David's growing obsession with controlling Sarah. He had been planning this imprisonment, and based on his writings, he was building up to something much worse. One entry from a week before the imprisonment read, "Found her bag today. She's planning to leave me. Can't let that happen. Need to take action soon." We also found evidence that David had been monitoring Sarah's communications extensively. He had installed spyware on her phone and computer that recorded every keystroke, every text message, every email. He had been tracking her movements using a GPS device hidden in her car. He had even installed a hidden camera in their bedroom that live-streamed to his phone, allowing him to watch her even when he wasn't home. "This guy is a textbook domestic abuser," Detective Chen said. "Isolation, control, escalating violence, and threats of murder-suicide." Sarah was right to be terrified, but the most disturbing discovery was in the basement. We found a hole that David had been digging in the concrete floor. It was about 3 feet deep and roughly 6 feet long by 3 feet wide, roughly the size of a grave. Next to the hole, we found a sledgehammer, a pickaxe, and bags of lime. "Jesus," I muttered, staring into the hole. "What do you think this was for?" Detective Chen's face was grim. "I think we know exactly what it was for. And I think Sarah called 911 just in time." The forensics team determined that David had been digging that hole for at least 2 weeks. The concrete was old and thick, so it was slow work. He was doing it late at night when Sarah was asleep, which is why she never heard it until the final few days. The hole was exactly 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and he had already dug down 4 feet. Forensics estimated he needed maybe 2 more nights to finish it. Sarah called for help just in time. We also discovered that David had been researching soundproofing materials online. His browser history showed searches for how long can someone survive without food, missing person investigation procedures, and how to dispose of human remains. His computer contained detailed plans for what he intended to do with Sarah, and it was clear that he had been building up to murder for weeks. David Mitchell was charged with multiple felonies: domestic violence, false imprisonment, assault on a police officer, attempted murder, and conspiracy to commit murder. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and his own notebook provided prosecutors with clear proof of his intent to harm Sarah. The district attorney decided to seek the maximum penalty, arguing that David's actions showed premeditation and extreme cruelty. During the trial, which took place 8 months later, Sarah testified about the years of abuse she had endured and the 3 days of terror when David held her prisoner in their own home. She was brave and articulate, and her testimony was devastating. To David's defense, she described the escalating pattern of control and violence, the threats, and the final 3 days when she truly believed she was going to die. The defense attorney tried to argue that David was suffering from depression and alcohol abuse, and that his actions were the result of mental illness rather than criminal intent. They brought in a psychiatrist who testified about David's mental state and his history of job loss and financial stress. But the prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Maria Gonzalez, painted a clear picture of a man who had systematically terrorized his wife and was planning to murder her. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," Ada Gonzalez said in her closing argument, Sarah Mitchell whispered one word into a phone: help, and that word saved her life. But it also revealed the true nature of the defendant. This was not a man having a mental health crisis. This was a predator who had been planning to kill his wife and dispose of her body in a hole he dug in their basement. The evidence shows months of planning, surveillance, and preparation. This was cold-blooded, premeditated murder that was only prevented by the courage of the victim and the quick response of law enforcement. The prosecution presented evidence of David's extensive planning, including his notebook entries, his internet search history, the modified bedroom door, the hole in the basement, and the surveillance equipment he had installed throughout the house. They also brought in expert witnesses who testified about the pattern of domestic violence and how it typically escalates to murder. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all counts. David Mitchell was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. The judge, in handing down the sentence, said that David's actions represented a level of premeditation and cruelty that shocks the conscience, and that only by chance and the victim's extraordinary courage was this case not a murder trial. After the trial, I had a chance to speak with Sarah. She had moved to another state to start over, and she looked like a completely different person, healthy, confident, and free. She had gained back the weight she had lost during her ordeal. Her bruises had healed, and most importantly, the fear was gone from her eyes. "Officer Rodriguez," she said, "I want you to know that you and Officer Martinez saved my life that night. If you hadn't taken that call seriously, if you hadn't insisted on checking on me, ... You saved your own life, Sarah," I told her. "You found the courage to call for help, even when you were terrified. That took incredible bravery." She smiled, and for the first time since I'd met her, it was a genuine smile that reached her eyes. "I'm working with a domestic violence organization now, helping other women who are in situations like I was. I want them to know that there is hope, and that help is just a phone call away." I speak at shelters and support groups, and I tell them my story. I want them to know that escape is possible, even when it seems impossible. Sarah's case opened the floodgates in our community. Within a week of the story hitting the local news, we received 7 more domestic violence reports from women who had been inspired by Sarah's courage. One of them had been held captive for 6 months. Another had been planning her own escape for over a year but was too scared to act. Sarah's story gave them hope and showed them that escape was possible. The Mitchell case also changed our entire neighborhood watch program. We started training civilians to recognize signs of domestic violence. We taught them that domestic abuse isn't always loud, screaming, and obvious bruises. Sometimes it's the neighbor you never see anymore. The woman who stopped coming to book club, the family that suddenly keeps their curtains closed all the time. The community became our eyes and ears. We also implemented new protocols for 911. Dispatchers, Sarah Thompson, the dispatcher who took Sarah's call, worked with our training department to develop guidelines for handling calls where someone can only whisper or say a single word. They created a system of questions that can be answered with simple yes or no responses, allowing victims to communicate even when they can't speak freely. The case received national attention when it was featured on several true crime podcasts and television shows. Sarah agreed to share her story publicly because she wanted other victims to know that help was available. She became an advocate for domestic violence victims, working with legislators to strengthen laws protecting victims and improving law enforcement response to domestic violence calls. Detective Chen used the case as a training example for other law enforcement agencies. The level of planning and surveillance that David had employed was becoming more common as technology made it easier for abusers to monitor and control their victims. Law enforcement needed to be aware of these new tactics and know how to look for digital evidence of abuse. The case also highlighted the importance of taking domestic violence seriously, even when the evidence seems minimal. That whispered word could have been dismissed as a prank call or a wrong number. But our dispatcher, Sarah Thompson, recognized the urgency in that single word and sent units to investigate. Her decision to treat the call seriously saved a life. That case changed the way I approach domestic violence calls. It reminded me that behind every call, no matter how routine it might seem, there could be someone whose life hangs in the balance. Sarah's whispered word, help, was barely audible, but it was enough. It was enough for our dispatcher to send units to investigate. It was enough for Jenny and me to recognize that something was wrong. And it was enough to save a life. In my 15 years as a police officer, I've learned that sometimes the quietest voices are the ones that need to be heard the most. Domestic violence victims often can't speak loudly. They're too afraid, too controlled, too beaten down. But when they find the courage to whisper for help, we need to listen. The case also reinforced the importance of trusting your instincts. As a police officer, when David Mitchell answered the door that night, everything about him screamed that he was hiding something. His body language, his nervous energy, his reluctance to let us into the house, all of it pointed to deception. Officer Martinez, despite being relatively new to the force, picked up on the sounds from inside the house that confirmed our suspicions. Her sharp hearing and quick thinking were crucial to the successful outcome of that call. The investigation revealed just how close we had come to a tragedy. David's notebook entries and the hole in the basement made it clear that he was planning to kill Sarah and dispose of her body. If she hadn't found that old phone, if she hadn't been brave enough to use it, we would have been investigating a murder instead of preventing one. Here's a statistic that will shock you. Every 9 seconds in America, a woman is assaulted or beaten by her intimate partner. Every day, more than 3 women are murdered by their husbands or boyfriends. Sarah Mitchell was 4 hours away from becoming another statistic. 4 hours. That's how close we came to investigating a murder instead of preventing one. The case also highlighted how domestic violence can happen to anyone in any neighborhood, regardless of income or social status. The Willowbrook neighborhood, where the Mitchells lived, was considered one of the safest in the city. Houses cost $500,000, crime was virtually non-existent, and residents felt secure. But behind the facade of suburban normalcy, a woman was being tortured and held prisoner by the man who had promised to love and protect her. Today, Sarah Mitchell is living a new life, free from fear and violence. She's remarried to a man who treats her with respect and kindness. She's become an advocate for other domestic violence victims, using her experience to help others find the courage to seek help. Her story serves as a reminder that escape is possible, even from the most desperate situations. David Mitchell is serving his sentence in a maximum security prison. He'll be eligible for parole when he's in his 70s, assuming he lives that long. The justice system worked in this case, but it was almost too late. In prison, David has been the victim of violence himself. Other inmates don't look kindly on men who abuse women. As police officers, we see the worst of humanity on a regular basis. We see what people are capable of doing to each other, especially to those they claim to love. But we also see incredible courage and resilience in victims like Sarah, who find the strength to survive and ultimately to thrive. The next time you hear about a domestic violence case, remember Sarah's story. Remember that behind every statistic is a real person who deserves to live without fear. And remember that sometimes all it takes is one whispered word to change everything. In police work, we often say that we're in the business of helping people on the worst day of their lives. For Sarah Mitchell, that Tuesday night in November was certainly one of the worst days of her life. But it was also the day she got her life back. That's why we do this job. That's why we answer every call, no matter how routine it might seem. Because you never know when that call might be someone's last hope, their final chance for rescue. What many people don't realize is that domestic violence affects people from all walks of life. It doesn't discriminate based on income, education, race, or social status. The woman being abused could be your neighbor, your co-worker, your friend, or your family member. They might seem to have the perfect life from the outside, but behind closed doors, they're living in fear. The signs aren't always obvious. Abusers are often charming and manipulative in public, which is why their victims are sometimes not believed when they try to seek help. They isolate their victims from friends and family, control their finances, monitor their communications, and gradually break down their self-esteem until the victim believes they deserve the abuse or that escape is impossible. Technology has made it easier for abusers to control their victims. GPS tracking, spyware, hidden cameras, and social media monitoring are all tools that modern abusers use to maintain control. Law enforcement has had to adapt to these new realities and learn to look for digital evidence of abuse. If you suspect someone you know is being abused, don't ignore the signs. Offer support without judgment, help them develop a safety plan, and connect them with resources. Sometimes just knowing that someone cares and believes them can give a victim the courage to seek help. Sarah whispered help, and we heard her. In the end, that's all that mattered. But it's important to remember that not every victim is able to call for help. Some are too closely monitored, too isolated, or too afraid. That's why it's crucial for friends, family, neighbors, and community members to be aware of the signs and to speak up when they suspect abuse. The National Domestic Violence Hotline is available 24/7 at 1-800-799-7233. They provide confidential support and can help victims develop safety plans and connect with local resources. Many communities also have local domestic violence shelters and support organizations that provide emergency housing, legal assistance, counseling, and other services. For law enforcement officers, this case serves as a reminder of the importance of taking every domestic violence call seriously, no matter how minor it might seem. Domestic violence often escalates over time, and what starts as verbal abuse can quickly turn deadly. Officers need to be trained to recognize the signs of abuse and to understand the dynamics of domestic violence relationships. This case also highlights the importance of interagency cooperation. The successful resolution required coordination between patrol officers, detectives, crime scene technicians, prosecutors, victim advocates, and medical personnel. Each played a crucial role in ensuring Sarah's safety and bringing David to justice. As I reflect on this case years later, I'm struck by how many small things had to go right for Sarah to survive. The old phone had to have enough battery. Sarah had to find the courage to use it. Our dispatcher had to take the calls seriously. Jenny and I had to trust our instincts. The backup had to arrive quickly. Any one of these things going wrong could have resulted in tragedy, but they all went right, and a life was saved. That's the power of one whispered word: help. It's a reminder that no matter how desperate a situation might seem, there's always hope. There are always people willing to help, to listen, to act. Sometimes all it takes is the courage to reach out, even if it's just a whisper. Sarah's story has a happy ending, but too many others don't. Every year, thousands of women and men are killed by their intimate partners. Countless others live in fear, trapped in relationships that could turn deadly at any moment. We can't save them all, but we can try, we can listen, we can believe, we can act, and sometimes that's enough to save a life. In the end, that's what police work is really about: being there when people need us most, listening to the voices that others might ignore, and never giving up on the belief that every life has value and every person deserves to live without fear. Sarah whispered help, and we heard her. That single word changed everything for her, for us, and for everyone who has heard her story since. It's a reminder that in our darkest moments, when all hope seems lost, help is just a whisper away.